This case is pretty intense. It raises some tough questions about police dogs.
Yeah, it does. It's about the balance between keeping officers safe and, making sure force isn't excessive,
Especially with dogs. Right.
especially with dogs. They can inflict some serious damage.
This is the story of Talmika Bates. Back in 2020 in Brentwood, California, she was injured during an arrest involving a K-9.
Right, and
We've got this article from Atlanta Black Star.
okay.
We're going to try to figure out exactly what happened, what were the legal arguments, and what it means for police canines more broadly.
Yeah, it really highlights the whole officer safety versus excessive force debate.
Okay, so let's rewind back to February 2020. Bates and two other women, they were involved in a theft from an Ulta beauty store.
Right. Over $10,000 worth of stuff. And then a car chase.
Yeah, the article says they even rammed a police car during the chase.
Yeah, that's a key detail because it adds to this sense of danger, right? It kind of explains why they brought in the K-9 unit.
Wow. Eventually, they ditched the car and ran off into the woods.
Can you imagine?
I mean, imagine being Bates, hiding, calling your mom, trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah, just a moment of quiet in this whole chaotic situation.
And then?
And then everything changes. Officer Ryan Rezentes, the K-9 handler, shows up with his dog, Marco, an 85-pound German Shepherd,
Finds Bates, who is still talking to our mom.
on the phone.
And this is where things get really, really difficult to hear.
Yeah.
Marco attacks Bates from behind, biting her head, dragging her
And
backward.
the article talks about horrific injuries. Scalp partially torn off. It's awful.
And the body cam footage.
The body cam footage is key. It reportedly shows everything.
Yeah.
The screaming, the commands, how long the dog held on.
It says you can even hear Bates yelling, "I'm right here."
As the officer's approaching.
She was surrendering.
But the dog didn't let go.
She's crying out, "He's biting me. Oh my God, I'm coming out. Please get your dog." It took over a minute for the officer to get Marco off.
That delay, a lot of people are focusing on that. How did the officer respond?
The article says you could even see the bites in the footage. Open wounds on her head, even bone.
It's just awful.
Bates ended up needing over 200 stitches to repair her scalp. And the article says she's still dealing with the consequences. Traumatic brain injury, PTSD, headaches, dizziness, nightmares.
Really highlights the lasting impact, right? Even if force is considered justified.
Now let's get into the legal part of this story. Bates sued the officer and the city of Brentwood for using too much force, saying they violated her Fourth Amendment rights.
Just to clarify for our listener, the Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures by the government.
So what's Bates' argument exactly?
Well, she's saying the dog bite, it was an unreasonable seizure, especially since she was surrendering.
So what did the other side say?
Well, the officer in the city, they're claiming that the prolonged bite was for safety. They said Bates hadn't been searched, she was resisting arrest, and she was still a potential threat.
It sounds like a tricky legal area.
Definitely a gray area. In April of this year, the judge, U.S. District Court Judge Rita Lynn, ruled that letting the dog go after Bates was probably justified. But letting him bite her for so long after she surrendered, that's a problem. The judge said a jury could easily find that the officer violated Bates' Fourth Amendment rights.
So the initial use of the dog may be okay,
Right.
but keeping him on her, that's questionable.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The judge also denied the officer qualified immunity.
Now, what is that?
It's basically a legal shield that protects police officers from being sued unless they clearly violate someone's constitutional rights.
So by denying it,
The judge was basically saying, hold on, there might be something here.
so that pushed the city to settle.
Yep. They ended up paying Bates almost $1 million.
Wow, $1 million.
That's huge.
What did people say about the settlement?
The police chief said the settlement, it was just to avoid legal fees. He also said the city doesn't have any working police dogs anymore.
No more police dogs. What does that tell you?
Yeah, I mean, is this the beginning of a bigger shift away from canines?
Bates' attorney, Adante Pointer, said, and I quote, "We need to recognize that canines are dangerous, sometimes lethal weapons that can cause life-altering damage or kill someone, even when an officer is trying to get them to release and relent."
Powerful statement. It really points to the larger issue. This isn't just about one incident.
He goes on to say, "Here we saw a trained canine handler stand by while his dog mauled an unarmed young lady who was surrendering. Using a dog to exact street justice doesn't make the abuse of someone's civil rights any better, and we want our police to do better."
Really emphasizes the need for accountability, doesn't it?
So you have this situation where a crime was committed, but everyone's focused on the canine. It shows just how complicated and controversial this whole issue is.
Absolutely. How do we keep people safe but also protect their rights? It's a tough balance.
Yeah. Stepping back for a second, I think it would be helpful to understand the history of police canines, how their role has changed.
Yeah, definitely. It might give us some context for the issues they're facing today.
Let's dig into that after this.
Yeah, the history of police dogs, it's quite interesting.
It is.
I mean, they were mainly for tracking and catching people,
Right.
but their jobs have expanded like crazy.
So what else do police dogs do these days?
Oh, man, sniffing out drugs and explosives,
Oh.
search and rescue,
Okay.
even crowd control. They're so versatile.
Yeah, I bet the training's different for, say, a drug-sniffing dog versus one used in arrests.
You're right. The training, both for the dog and the handler, it's super intense and very specific to the job.
I mean, you wouldn't want a dog trained to find drugs suddenly taking down a suspect.
Exactly.
So this training, it's ongoing, right? It's not just a one-time thing.
No, it's continuous. Throughout the dog's entire career.
Yeah.
They need that constant practice to stay sharp and to, stay within the law.
Well, this case with Talmika Bates, it shows how tricky it can be to figure out what's acceptable force with a dog. Where do you draw the line?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
The law often uses this concept of reasonableness. Was the force reasonable based on the circumstances?
But what's reasonable to one person might be totally over the top to someone else.
Exactly. It's subjective, which is why these cases are so complicated and often end up in court.
Right.
Judges and juries, they have to consider so many factors.
Like what?
The crime, was the suspect a threat? Could the police have done something different? And obviously, how did the officer and dog act?
It sounds like a legal and ethical tightrope walk.
It is.
This case also made me think, what about the handler? If a dog does something wrong, who's to blame?
That's a great point. Generally, legally speaking, the handler is responsible for their dog.
Oh.
That's why their training is so important. They're taught to control the dog, read its signals, know when to step in.
So in the Bates case, letting the dog bite her for so long after she surrendered, was that the handler messing up?
It's possible. The judge seems to be saying the situation changed and the handler should recognize that and stop the dog.
So how do you even stop a dog that's already biting someone?
Handlers have techniques. Verbal commands, hand signals, even physically pulling the dog off.
Okay.
But how well those techniques work, it depends on the dog's training, its personality, the intensity of the situation.
So being a canine handler, that's a lot of pressure, a lot of skills needed.
It's a tough job, and because of incidents like this one, it's a job that's being looked at more and more closely.
Yeah, because we're talking about powerful animals that can cause real harm, right?
Right. We need clear rules, solid training to make sure using them is always the right call.
So what happens now after a case like this? What does this mean for police departments and how they use canines moving forward?
This case has reignited the debate. There'll be more scrutiny on how they're trained, when they're used, who's holding them accountable.
Do you think some departments might stop using dogs for arrests altogether? I mean, given the risks?
It's definitely possible. Some might use them only in very specific situations or find alternative ways to arrest people.
Like what kind of alternatives?
There's been a lot of talk about less lethal options like tasers, beanbag rounds.
Things that can control a situation without potentially deadly force.
But even less lethal can be controversial, right?
Absolutely. There's no perfect solution. Every police action has risks.
Right.
And they got to weigh those risks very carefully.
Yeah. It's so complex, no easy answers.
Yeah.
But this case, it's definitely made everyone think harder about police dogs. Are we using them the right way?
It's forced us to confront these tough questions. Training, accountability. How do we make sure the public is safe and people's rights are protected?
And it's a conversation we need to keep having.
Definitely.
We've been focusing on the problems, but K-9 units can do good too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Besides catching criminals, what else are they good for?
They are incredible at finding drugs, explosives, missing people.
Right.
They can warn officers about danger, sometimes even prevent violence.
And just seeing a police dog, that can be a deterrent.
Oh, for sure. It discourages criminal activity.
Yeah, if I was thinking of doing something illegal,
Right.
seeing a dog would make me think twice.
Yeah.
Exactly. Plus, they're great for crowd control, keeping things calm, and preventing things from getting out of hand.
So it's about balance,
Yeah.
using their skills, but ethically responsibly.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Now let's talk about the money. Almost $1 million, that's a lot to pay out. What does that tell us about these kinds of cases, legally speaking?
It's a massive settlement. It shows a trend we've been seeing, big payouts when police are accused of wrongdoing, especially excessive force.
So it's not just a one-time thing.
Nope. People are more aware of police brutality. They're willing to hold departments accountable. Plus, body cam footage, other evidence, it makes it harder for police to defend themselves.
So do you think these big settlements actually make a difference?
I hope so. Heading them in the wallet, it can motivate change.
Right.
It might encourage better training, stricter rules, trying to avoid using force whenever possible.
So these settlements, even though they come from something bad, could lead to positive changes down the line.
That's the optimistic view. And there's evidence to support it. Departments have made changes after big settlements. Things like revising their use of force rules, more training, using body cams for transparency.
Okay, that is a little bit of good news.
It is.
So can we get specific about these reforms? What are some of the key changes happening in canine training and deployment?
There's a big emphasis on what's called scenario-based training.
Okay.
Handlers and dogs are put through realistic situations they might face on the job.
So not just commands, but preparing for the unexpected.
Exactly. It's about teaching them to adapt, to make good decisions under pressure.
Are they changing how they pick dogs and handlers too?
Absolutely. Not every dog is right for this work, and not every officer is cut out to be a handler.
Right.
The selection process is getting tougher. They're looking for dogs with that balance of drive and controllability, and officers who are patient, empathetic, good leaders.
So they're looking at both sides of the equation, the animal and the human.
Yeah. It's a complicated issue. You got to look at the whole system.
Right.
To make sure these canine units are being used the right way.
If our listeners want to learn more about these reforms, where can they go?
A lot of police departments have websites with their canine policies and training.
Okay.
You could also reach out to your local police department, ask about community programs, or even ask if you can watch a canine demonstration.
That's a great idea. Learn directly from the source.
Right. Understand the challenges, the opportunities.
You know, we've been focused on the problems, but
Right.
canine units can be a real asset when it comes to public safety.
For sure.
I mean, besides catching the bad guys, what are some of the valuable roles they play?
Oh, canines, they have an incredible sense of smell.
Right.
They can detect things we can't. Drugs, explosives, even missing people.
Wow.
They can warn officers about danger, maybe even help de-escalate a situation before it turns violent.
And just their presence, it can deter crime.
Exactly. Just seeing a canine unit can make people think twice about breaking the law.
Right.
Plus, they're great for crowd control, keeping things orderly, and preventing chaos.
So it's all about finding the right balance, using their skills, but making sure it's done ethically, responsibly, with proper oversight.
And to set it better.
So, from your perspective, where do we still need to improve when it comes to how police use canines?
One area, data. We need better data on when and how dogs are used, what kind of incidents, the outcomes.
Okay.
This data can help us see trends, identify patterns, figure out if we need more training, policy changes.
So using data to make smart decisions.
Exactly. It gives us a clearer, more objective picture.
What else should we focus on?
Independent oversight.
Okay.
We need someone outside the police department looking at how dogs are used.
Checks and balances.
Exactly. It builds public trust, makes sure complaints are investigated properly.
What about educating the public? It seems like there's a lot of confusion about police dogs and their role.
Oh, public education is key.
Right.
We need to do a better job of explaining how they're trained, what they can do, their limitations.
Demystify it all.
Right. Empower people to understand their rights, recognize when things aren't right, and hold the police accountable.
For folks listening who want to get involved in advocating for responsible canine use, how can they do that?
There are many organizations out there, national and local, focused on police reform, animal welfare, civil liberties.
Okay.
They offer information, organize events, advocate for better laws and policies.
So people can join a movement, find like-minded folks who want to make sure canines are used the right way.
It's about making your voice heard.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. The Bates case, the broader issues with canines, the laws, the changes happening.
It's a really complex, often controversial topic.
It is.
Yeah.
And for everyone listening, keep learning.
Yeah.
Do your own research, connect with advocacy groups, talk to your local police.
Exactly.
The goal isn't to get rid of canine units. It's to make sure they're used ethically, responsibly, with the right oversight.
It's about balance, using their strengths, minimizing the risks.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. What if we trained canines differently? Maybe focusing on de-escalation, communication, minimizing harm.
Hmm, that's interesting. What are you thinking?
I've heard about positive reinforcement training, rewarding good behavior instead of using punishment or force.
That's a fascinating concept. It fits with the movement toward more humane, more effective policing.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So with positive reinforcement training, you're focusing on rewarding the behaviors you want, not punishing the mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
It's about building trust, cooperation, making the dog eager to work with the handler,
Okay.
less likely to be aggressive. It's kind of like raising a child.
Oh, interesting.
You praise them when they do good, redirect when they stray. Same with dogs, especially police dogs.
You need that clear communication.
Right. Control is essential.
Thinking about Talmika Bates, do you think a dog trained this way might have reacted differently?
It's possible. If the dog is trained to trust the handler's cues, knowing those cues lead to good things, they might be more likely to release a suspect quicker, even when things are intense.
It's amazing how a change in training could have such a big impact.
It really could. And it also changes the relationship between the handler and the dog.
How so?
Instead of a weapon, the dog becomes a partner, a teammate you need to understand and respect.
That's a big shift in thinking. Could that change things for law enforcement in general?
Absolutely. It fits in with this whole idea of community policing, building trust between the police and the people they serve.
Right.
And a dog trained with positive reinforcement, seen as a partner, that could really help build those bridges.
It could.
Imagine a canine unit that's not just good at stopping crime, making arrests,
Right.
but also connecting with people, breaking down barriers.
It's a powerful image.
It's a vision worth striving for.
It is.
As we figure out these challenges in law enforcement, we need to be open to new ideas, new ways of thinking about canines.
So for our listeners who want to learn more about this positive reinforcement training, where should they start?
There's tons of stuff online. Just search for positive reinforcement dog training or canine training methods. You'll find lots of resources. There are also organizations focused on humane and effective canine training. We can link some in the show notes.
That's a great idea. Really makes you wonder, what if this kind of training could change everything about how we approach policing?
It's definitely something to think about. It's a reminder that we should always be looking for better ways, more humane and effective ways to keep people safe.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive today. We covered a lot. The Talmika Bates case, the bigger issues around canines, the laws, the reforms that are happening.
It's a complex and controversial issue.
And for everyone listening, keep the conversation going. Read about the case, connect with those advocacy groups, talk to your local police about their canine programs.
Every voice matters.
Remember, the goal isn't to get rid of canine units, it's to make sure they're used the right way, ethically, responsibly, with the right oversight.
It's about that balance, using their skills for good, protecting people's rights.
And that's a conversation we all need to be a part of. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.